Today we're talking with Ian McFadyen, the author of the Carmichael Detective series. He is a very loved author in the crime genre, and he is in the top 10 of the most loaned library books for that genre. He has got 8 books out, with the 9th one on the way, and I think I'm right in saying that one of them has also been translated into Italian.
2, actually.
2?
Ah! So our first question is, when did you get into writing and what inspired you to do that? Do you have sort of a backstory on that for us?
I started my first book 20 years ago. I'd worked predominantly in the electronics industry in sales and marketing actually for many, many years. And I was looking for a distraction from my day-to-day work. I felt it was quite pressurized, traveling a lot, had a lot of people working for me. And so I enjoyed it, but it was full on really. Plus I had still a youngish family, so I didn't really have anything that I could do or felt I could do that would sort of take me out of my day-to-day work. And I'd always harboured a desire to write a book. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. The intention was only to ever write one book when I started. I didn't dare to dream that it would ever be published, to be perfectly honest, because I didn't know much about the publishing world, but I knew it was tough. So I really set myself a target of writing a book within a year, and for it to be something that I felt reasonably proud of, and that would be well received by the small number of people that I'd actually share it with. And the intention was not to share it with too many people. It was just really family and friends. So that's really what kicked it off. But to be honest, as soon as I started writing, I was probably only 5 or 6 chapters into the book, and I thought, even if this doesn't get published, I'm going to continue to do this because I loved it so much. It was great. It was a release. You could use your imagination. Obviously, it's fiction, so you just make it up as you go along. It was fantastic, and it was really calming. It was. And the other thing I liked about it was the solitary aspect of it. You know, you sat in a room on your own, nobody disturbing you, nobody giving you any input into what you do, no great time scales, just tap away on your keyboard. And it was just wonderful. And I just loved it ever since. So that's really how it started.
That is so inspiring. Lauren and I are obsessed with an author called Elizabeth Gilbert, and she talks about the creative process. And you've kind of echoed a lot of her arguments there, that actually creativity should be something that you just feel passionate about, you just experiment with, you don't really worry about where it goes. And it feels like that gave you a huge amount of momentum, made it really enjoyable, and it's probably what made it a success for you, because you didn't put that pressure on at the beginning.
Yeah, and I deliberately tried not to put myself under pressure. I was living in quite a pressurized world, or I thought I was, I guess. We all think that, don't we, at times. And I thought, I'm not, this is my relaxation. So I deliberately didn't put myself under pressure. I didn't give myself a stupid time scale to finish the book. And I've never set myself rigid goals of you must do so many words a day, and because I know that I wouldn't enjoy that. I actually thrive when I know that I can just do it when I want, and when I'm not ready, I just do something else. I'm always thinking about books, obviously, but the actual writing itself, I only write when I want to write.
Gosh. And actually, that's really interesting when you're saying that. So when you were talking about how you just started writing your first book and you realised this is amazing and you could really enjoy it, had you already thought about the greater world of like the detective, or were you just thinking of a one book only, this is the kind of genre I really want to get into? And is that how you came about writing that specific novel?
Yeah, good question. It's weird because a few people have asked me this before, and I never considered writing anything else other than a murder mystery. So it wasn't as if I sat down and thought, I want to write a book, and what's it going to be? It was, I want to write a book, and it's obviously going to be a murder mystery. Now, I don't know what was going through my head, but I didn't consider anything else. That was what I was going to write. And I think I have thought of it, thought why that was, and I think it's to do with my personality really. I like solving puzzles and conundrums, so it just seemed an obvious thing for me to do, was to set a puzzle, set a conundrum for other people to solve. Obviously you don't want them to solve it, but that's what you're doing. You're giving people enough information hopefully to enable them to have an idea and work out who it was, and or why somebody was a murderer, or why somebody did what they did. But obviously you don't want them to work out what happened. So you're sending out sort of red herrings, and you're emphasizing things that you hope people will pick up on. And so it's setting traps, really, but at the same time trying not to cheat the reader as well. I'm always very conscious of that when I'm writing, that would hate somebody to get the end of the book and say, well, yeah, I liked it. Well, I hope they always say I liked it, but to say, well, that was a bit unfair because he didn't introduce the murder until 2 chapters before the end, or that bit of information was so key that nobody could have solved that until the end because he only told us at the end. So I try not to do that, but at the same time, it's a real fine line because you don't want to give it away too early. And when, obviously I know who's done it, and when I'm writing, I'm thinking, God, that seems a bit obvious to me. Is that going to be obvious? And it is really tricky to not cheat the reader, but at the same time to give them a chance to solve it.
You do that really well. It's quite reminiscent of an Agatha Christie in that way, of that kind of, you've got all the clues, but you're not going to be able to work it out before the end, but it will make sense at the end. I've certainly really enjoyed that about the books. I was really struck by what you said about the writing being an escape and you just being able to be on your own and get on with it. And I'm surprised that you didn't mention your young family as a barrier to that, because I think so many people feel like when they've got these busy lives, they're not able to sit down and get on with it. But was that the biggest challenge you found, or was there another challenge?
No, they were really, well, when I started, I'm trying to work out how old they were now. So they would have been, my youngest would have been 7 or 8 when I started. My eldest then would have been about 12. And they were okay with it, actually. In fact, they were actually quite chuffed with Dad being an author. It was something for them to talk about. And they were very supportive. But again, although it was a distraction, although it was a hobby, basically, it wasn't taking up a huge amount of my time. To write 500 words a day, you can actually do that if you've got a rough idea what you're writing before you sit down really quickly. You could do that in half an hour, easily, without any problem. So it wasn't as if I was sort of sat in my room for hour after hour after hour. It was something I did that still fitted in with everything else, but it was a relaxation. And I mainly do it in the morning. I haven't got sort of set routines, but I'm a real morning person. So I'd quite often be, and I still do, write before anybody's got up. So when they come down to breakfast, I've finished for the day in terms of my writing, because that's my most productive time.
That's what we were going to ask you. We were going to ask you if you have sort of a daily routine or any sort of routine, like for your writing.
I don't have a strict routine, but I do tend to be more morning based. I probably, out of all the words that I've written and have been published, which has got to be getting on for 500,000 now, I would be surprised if 5,000 of those words were written after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because I'm just done then. I'm not productive at all, and a lot of them are written probably about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, because I'll wake up with this idea and I want to get onto this, and I'll get in here and I'll tap away, and so I'm much more productive in the morning than I am at any other time of the day. And
do you follow quite a strict plot in any way? Because you're saying there that you just wake up and have an idea. So you were saying earlier that even sometimes when you're writing, you're not sure who the murderer is when you're writing the book.
Well, I normally know the kernel of the book, which is what I call it, which is the main thrust of the book. So that would be the twist, or as I said before, the way that the murder is concealed from the detectives. That would be the big driver of the book. So I know that before I even start, and I normally know who the murderer will be. Occasionally I don't, but so I know where I'm going, but there isn't a set plan. I don't have this template. I know, because I did try that once, and what I found was that it just went in a completely different direction, particularly when the characters start to interface. And with mine, because they're almost buddies of mine, because they've been around with me for 20 years and they're in every book, I know when Watson and Carmichael get together and talk, the conversation will only go one of a few ways. So when I'm actually writing it, it sort of leads me, because I know what Watson's like and I know what Carmichael is like.
Yeah.
So when I'm working, it actually moves me to the next level. They will do certain things. They will only do certain things. They won't do something ridiculously different. So that sort of takes me forward. And when I've tried to plan, which I haven't done that often, but when I have tried, I forget that. So I'll have this lovely plan, and then 2 chapters into that plan, they have a meeting, and you think, well, actually, he would obviously ask that question. And when they ask that question, the answer is, we're going this way rather than this way, which is what I planned for them to do. So I try not to do.
I love the idea that the characters are alive and that they're kind of coming through you. I think that's something that we hear a lot from authors. You're sort of giving them a vehicle to express themselves. We were actually going to ask you where did these characters come from, and how did you create them? Did you know them before? Who was the most surprising character?
Oh, good ones. I didn't know them before. When I started to write, obviously this may sound strange, but I didn't know whether I could write.
Yeah, no, that's happened. I feel a lot of people.
So I'd never had published anything before, so I had no idea whether I could write or not. And I knew I wanted to write a murder mystery. It was always going to be 1 book to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
So what I thought would be a smart thing to do was to create the environment using as much familiarity as I could and drawing as much as I could from my own life experiences without it being a rehash of my own family, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I chose the location as Lancashire because that's where I was brought up, rural Lancashire, so I knew rural Lancashire. I created the nucleus of the family that mirrored my own family. Not that the characters are my family, but I know how in a family where you've got an oldest child who's a girl, and then the middle one's a boy, and then the youngest one's a girl, I have a good idea of how those relationships work.
Yeah.
And certainly seeing their friends as they grew up, you get a better idea of how the age, sex dimension works with Kitty. So I thought I'll just mirror what I know. And even down to some of the occupations of the characters and things that Carmichael got involved with in the early books, there was stuff that I knew about. In the second book, he goes greyhound racing. And I know quite a bit about greyhound racing because I've been involved in greyhound racing. So I just drew stuff that I knew about, incorporated it into the book so that it was plausible, I guess. I never, at any stage with any of my characters, when they've got different occupations, try and pretend that I'm an expert in those occupations. But I want to have enough so that anybody reading it who is an avid greyhound follower would say, yeah, that's plausible. So that's what I did. I cheated, really. I just tried to create a story that helped me write the story without having to do too much analysis into characters and occupations. So I cheated a bit. It's a bit lazy, really, but that's what I did.
Well, we both really enjoyed that, actually. Penny is such a sort of positive, steady character and presence in the book, and she's always ready with a great observation. And we also really liked DC Dalton, Rachel, and the way that, again, the 2 women were very strong, very steady, very diligent, and that's something that you don't often find in this genre. I think they were, especially compared to sometimes, Watson's a bit of a clown character, and so the women in your stories come off really well.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know why, but I seem to enjoy, it's not conscious effort, a conscious thought on my part, but I seem to enjoy writing about the female characters in my books, even if they're characters that only appear in 1 book, and they could actually not necessarily be that pleasant, but I enjoy creating them probably more than I do the male characters. And I have thought about why that is, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I think just personally, I find women to be potentially much more complicated, I guess, than men. And that might be just my view of it. You know, men are sort of like black and white, and you know, if they have a problem, he might punch in one. Whereas women are much more capable, subtle, which can be used in a good way, but also can be used in a destructive way. So I find that quite interesting. And you know, some of my favourite characters in the books are women, even the ones who are the murderers or are not particularly nice characters. I quite like drawing those because I find them intriguing.
Yeah, I feel like you can sort of take their characters and go maybe a different route than you feel like you're doing with the men. That's a really interesting...
and I think sometimes that it's more tricky to work out really what they're thinking. They can, that's the way I look at it. They can actually, they can actually hide their true feelings a little bit better, which is perfect when you're writing murder mysteries, because you don't know if they're good, bad, or whatever.
And actually, that leads on really well. So we were going to also ask you about, you know, how when you reached out to publishers, you could tell us a bit about that. In terms of when you pitched your book, did you feel like you were pitching a slightly different tone? Some of the crime novels, as we discussed earlier, and there's always the lead character. Seems to be a man fairly often who does have a sort of alcohol problem, dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
There's always an on-off relationship throughout those series. Do you feel like that when you were pitching? Did you think about these things and
probably not in that sort of depth. It took me a while to get published. It took me about 5 or 6 years to get my publishing deal with the Book Guild, who I'm still with. I found it quite tricky to actually get the publishers and agents to really buy into what I was doing. I don't know, but I got the impression they were a bit wary of a man writing what is quite, they call them cozy murder mysteries now, and I sort of don't like that, but it's pretty much what I do.
Yeah.
Men don't normally write cozy murder mysteries. You know what I mean? It's more of a female thing. So I think I probably struggle getting a hearing. I'm not sure. But by the time I started trying to pitch it to publishers, it was always a series in my head. And that was the most difficult thing, because they were only really looking at me as a new author, as a one-book deal.
Yeah.
And I would say, no, it's not one book. This is a series. And they sort of couldn't get it. Now, of course, I wasn't just writing at the time. I was doing another job, and I think they thought, well, you know, is this guy going to be capable of writing anymore? So I did struggle, but I didn't know anything about the publishing world as well. So I probably approached it totally wrong, because I was just naive and wanted to get published. And I had dozens of knockbacks, absolutely dozens and dozens.
I think that is like the story of every author trying to get published. And actually, in that way, did you self-publish any of your books before you ended up going to a publisher?
No, and to be honest, I don't think I ever would. I'm not that interested in the publishing side of things. I'm interested in writing the book. I enjoy marketing the book to a degree, in terms of doing talks and meeting people who've read the book. I love all that stuff, but the actual mechanics of publishing, I'm a great believer in leaving things that you don't know about to people who do, and I don't. And I'm not really interested, you know, as long as the book comes out and I like it, that's what I want them to do for me. And in fairness to the Book Guild, that's what they give me, really. They are very good. I love the finished work, the printed piece that they finish with, and they're great to work like that. But it's not something that really floats my boat. I want to write. That's what I want to do, really, rather than anything else around the edges.
I think a lot of aspiring authors would be so inspired by your story, because I honestly think that so many people spend years trying to get a publishing deal, and you have done it. So it's absolutely incredible. I'm proud of that.
Yeah, no, I know. And I do get people asking me now, and it's very tricky to explain to them, because my experience is only my personal experience. I'm not an expert, but I know how hard it is. And I think it's such a shame that there must be so many people out there who are capable of writing really good books in every sort of genre, and there are also people out there who have written really good books and nobody will ever read them. And that, I think that is criminal, really, isn't it, when you think about it? It's absolutely criminal. So maybe those people could self-publish, but I would struggle with that.
Yeah.
And Ian, what would your advice be for the people that are out there feeling like, okay, this might have been my passion project, I'd love to have it published, but it just doesn't feel like I'm going to get there? What would you say to them?
I just persevere. I don't think there's anything else you can do. I think you've got to be pragmatic when you start out. There's people I've spoken to who said, look, I want to be an author, and you think, well, that's great, but please don't think that's going to be your career. Don't cut off every other avenue. Treat it as a hobby to start off with, and then hopefully it will build and it will develop from there. But I think it's like in everything, you've just got to persevere, and you may fail, or you may not succeed, which is not necessarily failure, is it? But you may not succeed, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing it. And I think a lot of it is down to luck. And people can say, well, I did this and I did that, and that's why I succeeded. A lot of it is luck. Talking to the right person at the right time. I'll give you an example. The very first agent, because when I wanted my first book published, I didn't know anything about it. So I contacted the biggest publishers I could find, because that's what you do, isn't it? Sent them my synopsis and all that sort of stuff, which was fine. And they just came back and said, we're not even going to entertain you unless you've got an agent. So, okay, I'll get myself an agent. So I got the book, which I've still got here somewhere, the little yellow book that has all the agents in, and I picked the first, I'm going to start at A. So I picked A, and I can't remember what they were called, but I sent off a note to this lady at this agency basically saying, this is my book, will you publish me? And she wrote back to me, her name was Elizabeth Barker, actually, I remember that, and she wrote back to me and she said, I love it. I really like it. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to represent you. And I thought, this is so easy. Everybody says it's difficult. And then 6 months went past and I didn't hear anything from her. And I thought, oh, they're very slow in the publishing world, aren't they, getting back to me? Anyway, it got to about 8 months and I thought, well, I better give her a chase. So I contacted the agency, and the person I spoke to there said, she's not very well. She's not been at work for a few months. I said, oh, well, I'm really sorry about that. But can I talk to you about my book? I've got this book. And they said, oh, no, Elizabeth's the only one that does murder mysteries. So we don't have anybody else here that does it. So anyway, another 6 months went past, and I contacted them again. They said, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that Elizabeth is feeling much better now, so she's doing fine. The bad news is that because of her illness, she's going to take early retirement. So she left. And I said, well, who's taken over from her? And they told me, who was a bloke, and I said, oh, well, I've been speaking to Elizabeth and she liked my book, will you represent me? And he said, no, I don't really like it. So I lost nearly 2 years. But, the point is that you just got to persevere until you finally find a home for your work, really.
And also, that story, if that was the story that had got you published, would have been so rare, but, incredible, but so rare. Imagine that, the first person that you open up and send to.
Yeah, I know. It sort of still makes me smile now when I think about it. But that was nice in a way as well, because she was the first person outside my family that said I could write, because nobody had said that before. So that, although it was a difficult experience from my point of view, it was actually comforting that I'd found somebody who liked my work.
I was going to say, in terms of that, once you've got a publisher and your book is out in the world, how did you find sort of in terms of meeting fans and building that level of community? Because you've got a really amazing community, don't you, who are like really avid fans, and is that just something that is like such like an economical thing that just happens over time?
I think with me it was time. In the early days I did a lot of book signings, and I did I've always done as many talks as I can, which are actually quite difficult to set up, so that was really the way that I got some awareness in the marketplace. But as the books progress, you sort of build up a following, I guess, and a lot of it is word of mouth as well, people who like your books. That's obviously changed in the last 5 or 6 years, where social media is much more important. And I'm not an expert in social media, so I'm sort of feeling my way around, but I'm not from the social media generation, as you probably gather.
Charlotte and I are also feeling our way around, and we're more of
we're learning it as we go. We keep saying we feel so old because it feels like it changes every day.
Yeah, so it's, you know, it's tricky, but that's so important now. So I am trying, you know, I'm coming into the 21st century. You know, I've got a Twitter, I'm on Twitter. I've got an author's Facebook page. As you know, I'm getting a website sorted out. I'm on Instagram now as well. And my last book, the last book that came out, I actually did a blog tour, which was brilliant. I didn't even know what a blog tour was until the book came out, and my publisher said, "Have you thought about a blog tour?" I said, "Well, no, because I don't know what it is." And when she explained to me, I thought, God, can't think of anything easier in the world than a blog tour. So she hooked me up with a company called what are they called? Rachel's Random Research. And this lady, she does loads and loads. She's really good. And she basically set it up, and I had about, I think in a week, something like 18, 20 reviews on my book, and it was phenomenal. And that's actually made a huge difference as well. So I'm hoping that it'll sort of gather pace with that. But I still do the talks as much as possible, but it is quite tricky to set up because it's just the economics of it all, because you can't do, it's very difficult to do a lot of talks in a short space of time because geographically they're quite a long way away. I guess again that's something that maybe social media can help by I could maybe do it online a little bit more, but I go around a lot of libraries and reading groups, that sort of thing, doing talks.
Incredible.
I find that helps. Yeah, I enjoy doing that.
Once you've got a publisher and you know your book is out in the world, how did you find sort of in terms of meeting fans and building that level of community? Because you've got a really amazing community, don't you, who are like really avid fans. Is that just something that is like such like an economical thing that just happens over time?
I think with me it was time. Yeah, in the early days I did a lot of book signings. I've always done as many talks as I can, which are actually quite difficult to set up. So that was really the way that I got some awareness in the marketplace. But as the books progress, you sort of build up a following, I guess, and a lot of it is word of mouth as well, people who like your books. That's obviously changed in the last 5 or 6 years, where social media is much more important. And I'm not an expert in social media, so I'm sort of feeling my way around, but yeah. I'm not from the social media generation, as you probably gather.
Charlotte and I are also feeling our way around, and we're more of
we're learning it as we go. We keep saying we feel so old because it feels like it changes every day.
Yeah, so it's, you know, it's tricky, but that's so important now. So I am trying. You know, I'm coming into the 21st century. You know, I've got a Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I've got an author's Facebook page. As you know, I'm getting a website sorted out. I'm on Instagram now as well. And my last book, the last book that came out, I actually did a blog tour, which was brilliant. I didn't even know what a blog tour was until the book came out, and my publisher said, "Have you thought about a blog tour?" I said, "Well, no, because I don't know what it is." And when she explained to me, I thought, God, can't think of anything easier in the world than a blog tour. So she hooked me up with a company called what are they called? Rachel's Random Research. And this lady, she does loads and loads. She's really good. And she basically set it up, and I had about, I think in a week, something like 18, 20 reviews on my book, and it was phenomenal. And that's actually made a huge difference as well. But I still do the talks as much as possible, but it is quite tricky to set up. It's very difficult to do a lot of talks in a short space of time because geographically they're quite a long way away. So yeah, I enjoy doing that.
I honestly, like, that is one of my favorite things about books. I used to work in book publishing, and that was always the funniest conversation, is after you'd all read the same book, is how you would all interpret one tiny thing that happened, and everyone's like, oh, that obviously meant that, and that obviously meant that. And it's incredible because it doesn't really matter. It just matters what the reader takes from it, doesn't it? So
I think so. Definitely, yeah. And with the characters as well, what I said before, that with some of the characters I do try and describe them a little bit. I try and paint an outline, but I've consciously never wanted to describe any of the characters in too much detail, particularly the main ones. Carmichael has got blue eyes because I've mentioned it a few times. But apart from that, I've never said whether he's tall, short, thin, fat. And I've done that deliberately because when I'm reading, I actually like to draw the picture in my head of the characters. And I actually get a bit irritated if the author then draws it for me, because I think, well, that's part of the enjoyment of me reading the book, is to picture somebody who is whoever. So I've tried to do that in my books, and it's great that, you know, different people will have a different image of physical image of Carmichael than I will, and Penny than I will, and I think that's good. I think that's a real part. Yeah.
Now you mention it, I realise that you haven't given them very detailed physical descriptions, but I think if this was to become a TV series, I probably would be disappointed with who people had picked, because I've got quite a clear picture of what all those characters look like and how they would react in certain situations from that. So that's quite a revelation for me that you haven't put that description in there.
Yeah, and I would probably be the same. I could probably live with it if somebody wanted to put it on TV. I could live with the disappointment, but yeah, it would be very strange to see who physically would play the people that I've created, because I can't believe they would be a mirror of what I've got in my head. And I don't share that with people because I think that's wrong, because you and they need to draw the pictures themselves. I think that's part of the whole thing.
What other crime books do you love? Who are your other favourite characters?
Yeah, no, good one. In terms of crime fiction, I probably watch more on TV than I do read. You know, I like watching Midsummer Murders, Vera, Lewis, Morse.
And is that why, do you know, in your books, it's not really, there's no real like intense violent scenes, it's not gratuitous or anything, that's all purposeful? I guess that all comes under the sort of umbrella of cozy crime, because it wouldn't be cozy crime if there was a horrendous murder.
Yeah, and that was a very conscious decision right from the start. I wanted to write something which was, you know, as I said before, it's all about, for me, it's about the plot, it's about the characters, it's about the twist. I don't want to make it gory. I don't want to spend ages talking about forensic side of the murders or other police procedure. That's not a big part of what I want to write. It's all about the plot, it's about the characters, it's about the twist. So that's what I focus on. But I made a very conscious effort not to make my books violent, because I don't think I'd be very good at it. I'm not interested in creating violence. I don't want to shock people. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I would never write anything like that. But what I did right from the start, and I've still done it, is I have 3 people in my head that I actually write to, or for, I should say.
That's so cool. Started
right at the outset. And they're almost like my moral compass, I guess. They're of very different ages, and I want to make sure that I write things that they would all like, they would all be intrigued about, and it wouldn't offend any of them. And that's really my sort of yardstick, is if I can do it for those 3 people. And I'll tell you who they are. One is my mother, who's sadly passed away about 10 years ago, but I still write, and she would not tolerate too much gratuitous violence or swearing or anything like that. So she's a good moral compass. One is my wife, and one is my youngest daughter. So I write for those 3 people as they were when I started. So my youngest daughter's only about 8 or 9, and my mother's still around. So that's sort of my moral compass, if you want.
What an interesting technique. What other crime books do you love? Who are your other favourite characters?
Yeah, no, good one. In terms of crime fiction, I probably watch more on TV than I do read. You know, I like watching Midsummer Murders, Vera, Lewis, Morse.
And is that why, do you know, in your books, it's not really, there's no real like intense violent scenes, it's not gratuitous or anything, that's all purposeful? I guess that all comes under the sort of umbrella of cozy crime, because it wouldn't be cozy crime if there was a horrendous murder.
Yeah, and that was a very conscious decision right from the start. I wanted to write something which was, you know, as I said before, it's all about, for me, it's about the plot, it's about the characters, it's about the twist. I don't want to make it gory. I don't want to spend ages talking about forensic side of the murders or other police procedure. That's not a big part of what I want to write. It's all about the plot, it's about the characters, it's about the twist. So that's what I focus on. But I made a very conscious effort not to make my books violent, because I don't think I'd be very good at it. I'm not interested in creating violence. I don't want to shock people. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I would never write anything like that. But what I did right from the start, and I've still done it, is I have 3 people in my head that I actually write to, or for, I should say.
That's so cool. Started
right at the outset. And they're almost like my moral compass, I guess. They're of very different ages, and I want to make sure that I write things that they would all like, they would all be intrigued about, and it wouldn't offend any of them. And that's really my sort of yardstick, is if I can do it for those 3 people. And I'll tell you who they are. One is my mother, who's sadly passed away about 10 years ago, but I still write, and she would not tolerate too much gratuitous violence or swearing or anything like that. So she's a good moral compass. One is my wife, and one is my youngest daughter. So I write for those 3 people as they were when I started. So my youngest daughter's only about 8 or 9, and my mother's still around. So that's sort of my moral compass, if you want.
What an interesting technique. And it's quite refreshing to read something in this genre that's got all of those twists, and it's, you know, it's interesting and it moves you forward, but it doesn't have all of that excessive violence that sometimes can put you off the genre and feel a bit sadist when you're reading it.
And to be honest, I'm very conscious when I meet people and they find out I'm a writer, and if I say, well, do you like murder mysteries? And they say, oh yeah, I love them. So, well, you know, what type? And if they're erring on the sort of gory side, I'll say, you might not want to read mine because I'm not sure I'm for you. So, and I think that's quite important. I think, you know, people's expectations of what they're going to read need to be set at the right level. I absolutely fully respect anybody who would never read a cozy murder mystery story in their life. That's fine. And I would never try and push my book on them because they won't like it. So there's no point.
Thank you so much. That was
it's been a pleasure.
Before you go though, could you do a shout out of where we could find you or where we can direct people to buy your books?
Yeah, my books are available in most good bookshops. Amazon, they're all on Amazon. You can get them from my publishers, the Book Guild. Yeah, you'll find them if you want them.
And we'll put like your Twitter handle and stuff in our...
Fantastic, that'll be really good.